Welcome, friends, to the Pioneers of the Independent Networks. I'm your host, Ricky Blues. This is your co-host, Lord Timothy Walker. And Lord Timothy just gave you the royal digit if you're here joining us by way of this wonderful webisode.
It's the number one finger.
The number one finger.
The first digit.
The first digit.
Yes.
The house of royalty. The royal digit. And Tim, since we're talking about all this royalty, where are we coming from this week?
This week we're coming from the Royal Palace in London.
Wow. Is it close to Buckingham Palace?
Very close to Buckingham Palace. We are actually in the smaller venue next to Buckingham Palace. The Queen is very particular in who she allows into Buckingham Palace, and we are working our way up to that.
Yes, we are. As our audience grows, so may our chance and opportunity to invade that first side, the prime side, Buckingham Palace.
Wouldn't that be nice if we had an audience of the Queen?
Well, maybe. She'd probably slap us both, and that would be the end of it. Off with their heads.
Let them eat cake.
Yeah, she would Marie Antoinette us. So, folks, if you've joined us in the past, you know that we bring to you all the characters, the matches, the promotions that populated the Mid-Atlantic independent wrestling scene from the 1970s, wink, wink, to today. Tim, that's a long time.
That is a long time.
A far stretch, probably as close to stretch as we get to getting into Buckingham Palace. What do you think?
It's quite a stretch.
Well, we better stay here at the Royal Dunes instead in wonderful Ocean City.
Okay. I think we can work on that one.
Maybe the Princess Royale.
Maybe the Best Western.
So, Tim, what is our topic? Since we've done all this banter and kind of like needled, what is our topic this week?
Well, our topic this week is how do you get heat?
Wow.
And not by loading up the wood stove.
Right. So kind of like what we were doing. We were needling the English, the proper UK.
A little bit.
By using a little bit of smarts, technology, and a couple smiles, words placed at the right place, I think we've done that job.
I think so.
So let's get into this episode.
Just for those who are a little bit on the casual wrestling side, what do you mean by heat and getting heat?
So heat would be that element that a heel, a villain, would use to put himself at odds with the fans and help him define his character so that everyone in that Coliseum, that auditorium, that arena, that National Guard armory identifies him immediately as the bad guy. It's a way of distinguishing yourself and making the people purposefully dislike you or dislike your character, which also, vicariously, Tim, helps put the shine on the babyface as he's slapping hands, kissing babies, hugging people. So for me, that's what we're talking about by heat. The way that that person, that villain, goes about making himself, entrenching himself in the villainous ways that are against the fans. So
and by getting heat, what do we mean by that?
So getting heat is the psychology of the way that you go about that business. And it can be done a lot of different ways. Think about what Roddy Piper did with his war with the Guerreros, where he put on a sombrero and rode a donkey and did said I was going to sing the Mexican national anthem and started singing La Cucaracha. Think about how, well, today it wouldn't fly in this political atmosphere, but that was what he did. He went about it getting heat. And he not only went after the wrestler with that, but the whole Latino population he didn't endear himself to. So that's what we're talking about, little simple things like that. And it's the way you go about it. There's no one set rule on how you go about it, but there are unwritten rules about areas that you don't cross. And a lot of that deals with, and we should make mention of this real quick, is these are professional athletes doing professional things, and they always try to stay away from any personal attacks because it doesn't amount to good business. It creates animosity. That's not what you're looking for. That's real heat. You don't want real heat. You want heat in the wrestling business sense, and getting heat in that wrestling business sense, contained to the four corners of the wrestling world, not bringing the personal side in. That's always been a taboo. Occasionally, people have broke that taboo, but it has always been a taboo. Leave personal things out of it. Bad for business.
I really like to think about it in terms of the old time arena show business as far as getting heat, rather than today's business, which is more a television based business.
Right. Very corporate.
Very corporate. You have to be very careful with what you say.
Yes.
I like to go back to the old times, the old quote, smoke filled arenas.
Right.
Where you would have some easily identified heels and some very easily identified baby faces. There was a clear definition between the two.
It was. And I think we've lost that a little in translation, where we see more anti-heroes or vigilantes than we actually do baby faces and heels. And it blurs the line. And when you blur that line, you also take away the sure responses that by design professional wrestling builds in, that back and forth between a heel and a babyface. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times that it works, but everyone can't be that character. And that's what we're seeing today. Everyone has become the anti-hero, the very distant, untouchable, neither good nor bad. They are on their own motorcycle, ride off into the sunset. It doesn't work for the world of professional wrestling. There's got to be that back and forth. Otherwise, the whole concept of the struggle is lost on someone or both parties being anti.
I agree with that. And I think it takes a lot of the fun out of being a fan. I think back in the day, when you had that clearly identified babyface and a clearly identified heel, it gave you a definite sense of rooting for one over the other. And the one you didn't like, that's the one you could go back and forth with. And it was so neat to see how that was set up in matches years ago.
Right. Well, let's take a look at, through what our discussion, what we mean by heat. So, Tim, describe some basic heat that a heel would use.
One of the basics is verbalizing.
Okay.
Back and forth between the fans and the wrestler. And I always like that. It provides a lot of interaction and a lot of quick thinking required on the part of both parties, really.
Well, it did. And if you really dissect the psychology of heat, it goes to the acumen of the heel, what they are observing, what they are taking in their observation, and making an announcement about it. First and foremost, it's easy to do something like the town that they're in. Yes. Why are they here? What has it done to them? How they're opposed to that town. So simple, so easy, quick observation, and boom, you can draw instant heat. It's well played out today, but it still works. You just don't have to do it so overtly as much as you can subtly hint at it, with little things. To me, that's the big thing, the acumen of the heel. If you take a look at how sharp heels are, they are the ones that have excelled, are the ones that can do exactly that. They can auditorily take over an entire match because of their observations, because of their ability to what they see, to translate it into a needle point for them to get at the fans and make the fans dislike them.
Definitely. And to get a reaction from the fans. Another thing I really, really like is when a heel will insult the local sports franchise.
A perfect example of that type of heat would be someone like what Pete Rose did, was exceptional. I think it was his WWE Hall of Fame announcement where he said, and it was in Boston, so he makes this announcement that he left tickets at the will call office, but Bill Buckner couldn't bend over and pick them up, which, was an allegory towards Bill Buckner missing that slow dribbler up the first base line that cost Boston a World Series. So, I mean, something so simple like that.
What a good needle.
Right.
What a good dig.
It is.
And it's nasty, and it's good.
And
it makes you think, and it gives you a hard time to come back with something. So naturally, you're just going to yell, "Boo!
Right.
Oh, I hate him! Ah, you stink!"
Right, because there's also an element of truth to it. And that's what...
Those are the best kinds of needles.
And it resonates. Now, it's not a vicious personal attack on someone in that audience, but it's taking them for a ride using a scenario that was a loss to them, losing a World Series, and making this statement in Boston. Talk about, resonating locally.
That's really good. Well, what do you think about Terry Funk getting on the microphone in front of a packed house and saying, "I know some of you don't understand what I'm saying. You may need a translator. So let me translate something that you'll understand. Let me put it in a language that you can really comprehend." Then Terry said, "Oink, oink, oink."
Wow. Talk about a way to immediately flip the crowd from his anticipation of him coming in, and then all of a sudden they're like, did he just say we're this, or this? Did he just say that we're this, that, or the other, or that our culture is this, or that our way of life is this? And it's ambiguous, but it digs at the person because they take their interpretation of what he's saying and place it against themselves. And that's what he wanted them to do. Okay? Did he actually say the words, or did he allude to the words? And that's where the best part of the heat is. It goes to your interpretation. How do you see what's going on there?
I could see that getting a big reaction.
Absolutely. It did.
And it did. Yes.
And it propelled him immediately with just a few words up the ladder of, well, this heel's got to now move up.
Just a few words, too.
Think about the techniques, not only with the talking, but the techniques in the ring to get heat. That's another thing, Tim.
Oh, I think that's a big thing.
Right. Tell us a little bit about the psychology of in-ring heat.
Oh, I think it's a very big part. Other than the talking, I think the actual physicality part of it plays a big role in making a match. Doing things behind the referee's back, like the old time, like pulling hair and pulling your opponent down after you've locked up and grabbing a handful of hair and pulling them down to the mat. The foreign objects. Anything that you can do that's really sneaky and nasty. Grabbing the ropes while you have your opponent in a submission type hold to add extra
pressure,
leverage on the hold. Just nasty little things. Even real slight little things like breaking up really slow on the ropes, or that extra little shove when the referee's ordering you back.
Or refusing to tie up. Claiming, well, he's got baby oil or grease on him. Check him, ref. Where the whole time, something like that, the psychology of, well, I don't want to touch this guy because, ooh, right? Little things like that. But here's another important part about heat in the match. If you're a villain and you're applying the heat, you are beating your opponent, and you're just beating him mercifully, and there is no sell on one side, and there is no hope on the other side, then that whole display becomes terrible, and there is no real heat built there. So when a heel uses tactics where he's beating a babyface, the babyface has to sell that heat. And in the midst of selling that heat, making that heat look like it's really there. Ricky Morton, That's all you have to. Those two words. Ricky Morton tells you about the cell. Anything that he's ever done, perfect. Made the villain look that much better because of the cell. But the other portion is if that villain doesn't build in hope spots in that heat, then he destroys the baby face. So the better that he builds the hope spots, meaning that as he's applying the pressure, you've got to give hope to the baby face that there is a comeback that the fans can get behind. Start building the baby face back up with the claps that kind of like the motivating claps. And then the villain tears him down. In the middle of the villain tightening the screws on the baby face, the baby face pull a move out like a sunset flip. And he gets a quick 2 count, but then the villain comes back up. And as he comes up, he chops him in the throat and takes back over.
Yes.
Something small like that where you just gave hope, but he cut that hope off with some cheating again. And it brings the fans back up knowing that he had him and he cheated. And that's the perfect way of applying those emotions when you use your techniques of in-ring psychology built with and backed by those little things like selling and the hope. We haven't even talked about tag team, adding another dimension to getting heat. But it applies the same philosophies. It is building the baby faces up and then doing something that in ring that cuts the wheels out from under him in a devious manner and allows you to apply move after move in heat so that it looks like the heel is going to win. And then there's those hope spots that we talked about earlier are now no longer the primary 2 combatants. You've got 4 combatants. So in tag matches, you also bring in your outside opponent or your outside partner with that. Like instead of the hope of a sunset flip and a cover for a quick 2 count, it could be the hope of a sunset flip, roll up, go to tag your partner to get the fresh guy in, but he's cut off, held at the legs, and isn't allowed to get it while the second person from the heel team comes in, drops an elbow back into the heat again. So it's something so similar, so easy, but follows the same rules. We're just adding other tools and broadening the dimension of the contest itself. I think it's pretty simple.
And I think that even multiplies the amount of heat when you have a tag team match. Especially when you have a babyface that has made a tag and the referee doesn't see it, and then the heel team switches out.
Right.
I mean, it's infuriating to watch. And I can see why people get involved in that.
But the other portion of that too, Tim, and I kind of glossed over it, a tag match is very separate and distinct from a singles match. So the same as a 3-way match. You're going to have people who are very good at those things. Ricky and Robert separated. They did singles work, but their best work was tag. And it was the same type of philosophy from the singles, but it was augmented to a tag style, and they became specialists, right? You see that.
Agree.
So,
and if you're a good singles wrestler, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good tag team wrestler.
100%. I agree with that 100%. I look at teams that are put together that you would think had chemistry, but don't. You know, and then you look at the same people that you never thought would have chemistry that had incredible Did you ever think that Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine would have chemistry?
No, because they were such separate personalities and they had built such big singles careers. And it seemed like, how do they mesh together?
Right.
But they did.
But they did with Johnny Valiant, I think, as a manager. So, again, separate and distinct. Same rules apply, but in a different vein. And we can't just assume that because you've got it as a single and you know how to apply the heat as a singles wrestler, that it translates to a tag team or to some other vein. You know, it becomes very distinguished. And there's different elements that broaden and narrow depending on where you apply that trait.
In addition to the heel getting heat like that, I always found it interesting when the heel would have a manager or a second at ringside who would strategically interfere at that time when the babyface was starting to make a comeback and infuriating the crowd even more. Or the manager passing a foreign object to the heel during the match in order to let him take over on the babyface.
Perfect example of that. Royce Prophet was the manager for Dave DiMeglio, right? Dino Casanova.
Yes.
And MEWF TV, Dino and I going at it. We're having a great match. People were into it. What's going on? Dave throws me outside of the ring. Royce Prophet hits me with the golf club that he had. People wanted to just rip him apart right there. Here I am laying on the ground, and Dave's got the attention of the referee. Royce comes over, hits me with the golf club, and the people you could see are reaching over the guardrails to get at him. It's perfect. It helped build me up, which was clearly defined. Dave is the heel, Ricky Blues as the face. What we're describing here, though, in that storytelling, is the accentuation of the tools. It's not just the combatants that you have in the ring. It's the other elements, right?
It's the referee.
It's the referee.
It's the manager.
It's the fans and what's along ringside. It could be something as simple as if there, and this is overdone now, but if there's a ref bump, right? Then what happens? All the things that would traditionally cause a disqualification are now at the beck and call of the heel or villain for a few seconds, like the use of a chair or dropping someone on the guardrails around the ring across the throat, like what was done with Ricky Steamboat in the way that was sold, and perpetuating that portion of the storyline. So in of itself, there's many tools of the trade around that helps accentuate what the villain or heel is doing to build that animosity against them, that can also carry over in that storyline for long periods of times, for a feud.
We talked about heat in the confines of the square circle, but there's also a way of building heat outside of the confines of the square circle during interviews.
Absolutely.
There's some great heat outside the ring during interviews with people like Roddy Piper, who did it weekly with his Piper's Pit, Eddie Gilbert, Jerry Lawler, Magnificent Morocco.
Oh my.
Was a magnet for this sort of thing. It probably wouldn't fly very well today, some of the things he said, but he could build some heat with his opponents. The things that he would say about
Tito Santana
in particular, it springs right to mind. The things about all the insults that he hurled at Tito, very personal insults that he hurled at Tito, personal insults that he hurled at Bob Backlund.
Right.
They were just what would probably be over the line today, but they certainly built a lot of heat for the match.
And for the time, they were fitting. We can't go back and judge history based on the time that it existed in, right?
Right. We can't blame them.
It's unique to itself at that time.
Right.
Exactly.
We can't blame them for using those tools at that time when they really didn't know any better.
Right. It was a different time and a different mindset as opposed to today. So you don't have to repeat that, but you can learn the lessons from it and use that same type of concept of how to do that. And that's the timeless portion of being a heel. How you take those observations to roll them into some insidious thoughts and put out there to draw people in. So there's a million ways to do it.
There is. And look at Piper beating up Frankie Williams on the set of Piper's Pit, or hitting Jimmy Snuka with a coconut. Just amazing amount of heat developed from that.
From just those little things. And again, what we're saying with this, the entirety of getting heat, is you have to have the acumen, the smarts, to understand what people don't like and what would set them off. Now, we're not talking about creating a riot, but have some of these things turned into the wrestling riots I mean, you said it, Piper and Snuka. I think it was 83, right? So 37 years ago, that event happened. And Tim, they're still talking about it today.
It's amazing. It's still one of the biggest things that ever happened in wrestling.
Right.
Up until today. I mean, that's an incredible book of history. And it sticks out like one of the biggest events ever.
Yes.
I think it's a great topic. It's something that I think has been lost in recent years. That interaction between the wrestlers and the fans. And that going back and forth. You don't see that as much anymore.
No, you don't. And if you really think about it, it is a microcosm of the match itself. You want that ebb and flow, the up and down of the match. And it should echo in the exact sentiments that the way the heat is applied. It brings the people to the dance, it keeps them invested in the dance, and it always leaves them hoping for another chance to dance to best the person who's putting out the insults or building the heat.